Taylor Vail, and I do instructional design at the Office of Faculty and Department of Instructional Support. So I'm really happy about this emerging trends today on a topic I don't know too much about, so I'm happy to learn what all these wonderful people are doing in their research and teaching. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then each of them is going to spend a few minutes describing the kinds of projects that they're working on and the kind of support they might be able to offer other people interested in doing this kind of work. And then we will have just a Q&A session that'll be kind of informal. You can ask them questions about their work. So just a short introduction. With us today we have Buckner, who is an assistant professor in the philosophy department. Cameron's research is interdisciplinary and covers a number of areas, including philosophy of mind, cognitive science, neuroscience, computer science, and psychology. We also have Kristina Neumann, assistant professor in the history department. Kristina is a Roman digital historian focusing on the persistence of local and regional identities under the Roman Empire and the relationship between empire and local autonomy through literary evidence. We also have Santi Thompson, head of digital services at the MDA Library. In addition to his work with faculty, Santi has published a number of articles on digital asset management and migration, metadata standards for libraries, and the accessibility use of digital materials. And then we also have Peggy Lindner, research assistant professor at the Center for Advanced Computing and Data Systems, as well as the Honor College. Peggy's expertise is in integrated data projects and data representation. She also teaches a DH course called Data Analytics in Student Hands, and you're doing a digital humanities course in the fall. And she is the liaison for digital humanities with the Center for Advanced Computing and Data Sciences. So please join me in welcoming our panelists.
So thanks everybody for coming. I want to thank Taylor for organizing. I guess this will be pretty informal. I'm mostly just going to show some pictures to give you a general idea of stuff I've done without explaining any of the technical details. Just to give a bit where I'm coming from, I started in AI. Artificial intelligence is in part why I do all the stuff that Taylor mentioned. And I use that in artificial intelligence, in digital humanities to try to solve some tasks for philosophy. And I was a digital humanities postdoc here a couple years ago and then became tenure track in philosophy. Talk about different pressures in doing DH research at different stages of your career later maybe on. But just to give you an idea of one way to think about DH most generally, there's a nice cartoon here. You get two little robots here saying, this job would be really, if it wasn't for all the boring repetition, this job would really be the pits. One way to think about computational methods very generally is if there was anything that you could automate, that's really boring for you, and if you could just do it 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 times and have a more thorough analysis or a bigger picture to look at that would help you in answering humanistic questions you're interested in, that might be a good time to reach for digital methods. Some scholars in DH have said, the computer is the most thorough of judges. It doesn't make a mistake, assuming you programmed it correctly, and you're doing the right kind of analysis, and so that's one way to think about everything. So one place where we needed a drudge was my advisor at Indiana when I was in grad school was an associate editor on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. I don't know if any of you know this project, but it's pretty exciting, I think, for the humanities because it's one of the first reference works that is very high quality, so it meets the criteria of academic citability. And it covers the whole discipline of philosophy. But it was organized entirely by academics without big publishers and it's open access now. They had a fundraising campaign and asked libraries to donate, but by and large, it's open access and free for anybody to get. But it's very, very big at this point. So it's got 1,600 volunteer authors and editors, more than 17 million words, 1,200 articles. The entries are asynchronously submitted and updated, right, which means that they can come up and be updated at any time. And 1 million weekly page hits, and it's open access, which means there's very little money involved. So there's a huge editorial task. And this was how we got started. You'll see we branched out very widely from this once we had a framework to deal with some of the challenges. But specifically, the problem was, I don't know if any of you have ever worked on a reference work, even a book, an edited volume. There's a lot of work that goes into doing the editorial tasks. In particular here, organizing cross-references and tables of contents and things like that. So we wanted to automate that as much as possible. Make a long story short, the way that we did that, I got together with a friend of mine in computer science, and we talked about building an architecture that would, in some sense, understand what is in the discipline of philosophy, and use that to build and automate the metadata management tasks for this online encyclopedia, which was already digitized and already had access to a whole bunch of domain experts that were entering the workflow to submit and update their entries. So it had some nice opportunities for computational methods to be employed already. The idea that we used is first we do some statistical data mining, machine learning methods. I won't explain any of the details because there's not time. But we use those statistical methods on the text of the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, as well as eventually other sources, other online encyclopedias, online philosophy papers, and so on, to develop hypotheses about relationships between terms that occur in the encyclopedia. Right? That's all based, just on patterns of co-occurrence of terms in digital text. And then we solicited feedback from those domain experts that we had access to because they were submitting their work to the encyclopedia to confirm or reject those hypotheses. Because like all statistical methods, they generate some junk. They were pretty good. We're proud of our statistical methods, but like all statistical methods, they generate some junk. And you can use the humans to moderate that and throw out some of the statistical hypotheses that are not reliable and keep the ones that are good. And then finally, we use that to build what computer scientists, digital humanists call an ontology, which is this decomposition of semantic space in philosophy. The ideas, thinkers, documents that exist in the discipline of philosophy. And that's ultimately what we use to automate the cross-reference generation and tables of contents for this. That's where I use some of my AI background here. So you build a kind of taxonomy for the discipline of philosophy, and that can then provide you with a sort of expert level understanding of what the ideas are in philosophy and how they're organized in sort of mental space. So I can actually maybe switch over and show you what the ontology looks like now. So this is what the finished product looks like at this point. We've got a kind of taxonomy browser. And so you can see philosophy divides into the various different sub-areas of philosophy. I could, for example, go into ethics and keep expanding. Applied ethics, history of ethics, meta-ethics. Go into applied ethics. I could get to bioethics. And then if and I don't have an internet. Should have checked that before I started doing it. Oh well. You would see a bunch of particular ideas. I'll see if that fixes in the background, but just keep with the presentation. You would see a bunch of particular ideas organized in the encyclopedia, and then you could go to the various entries in the encyclopedia. One of the ideas for why we wanted that taxonomy browser was the thought, well, if you're doing research, whether you're an undergraduate or a professor, the thought is, you might not know all the topics you should be aware of and all the resources that you should be looking for if you were writing that paper. And it would organize mutually relevant things, sometimes very surprising connections that even an expert might not be aware of, that you might want to look at if you were writing a paper on one of these topics. So one of the applications we could do is we did actually semi-automate the cross-referencing of the Stanford Encyclopedia. That's now all done by algorithms, as opposed to people reading all the entries and thinking, oh, of these 1,600 entries, right, which ones could possibly be relevant citing the cross-references, which if you think about a human doing that, it's pretty bad drudgery. We can also do now what computer scientists call faceted semantic domain-specific search. So you can do a search that's kind of guided by this big representation of what's in the discipline, zooming around the taxonomy, and being taken right to the cluster of things that's relevant to what you're working on, where that cluster is generated not by some particular person's intuitions, but rather by the actual text and the automated methods parsing the encyclopedia. You can call this kind of guided serendipity, right? Where the idea is, we could, even as experts in philosophy of mind, when we were playing with this tool, we found some really surprising connections that we wouldn't have expected. I could talk about some of those examples if anybody's curious. You can also do a lot of cool visualizations, and I'll show some in a minute to show the kind of things you can see now that all of this data is in place under the hood. Some visualization researchers call these things macroscopes. So the idea is, this is a kind of citation network for a discipline. If you were interested in some historical philosopher, for example, you could visualize all of the historical connections between that person, people he cited, major ideas that she worked on, all the different friends that they might have had, and that could give you a very informed, big picture look of the intellectual world of that individual that could be useful for all different kinds of humanistic research questions. You could also use it for citation management, and we did eventually build a kind of citation management tool on top of all this. Tracking change over time in the discipline is particularly interesting. So suppose you were interested in how the discovery of computers changed the way philosophy thinks about major issues. You could look over time, if you have historical dated documents, of how that semantic space got moved around and changed as a result of the discovery of the computer, or quantum indeterminacy, or any other big idea that really shook up our philosophical worldview. What we eventually wanted to do this, and we did, at this point most of this is pretty much implemented, was make everything interchangeable. So it's kind of an all-purpose humanities workbench that we call the Codex, where the idea is you could not just work with the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, but really any arbitrary digitized data source, and then plug that into a variety of different statistical analysis measures, whichever you wanted, whichever was suited for your purpose. Pass that to any of a bunch of different possible sources of validation to check the statistical hypotheses, and then use a bunch of different methods to build whatever kind of representation or visualization you wanted. And a lot of this is now implemented in the project. I'll talk about how much manpower and resources that actually required. It's not trivial, so it's not something you could do easily. But now this is what the finished product kind of looks like, right? So if I went to logical form, for example, in philosophy of language, you can see a bunch of major concepts that are relevant to logical form, navigate to the encyclopedia entries, you can search for them in different reference works. We built other analysis tools into the interface, so there's topic modeling implemented on all these resources too. If you know what that is, it kind of groups. It tries to look for clusters of mutually related ideas in statistical text, which is another kind of guided serendipity, because the thought is you can discover clusters of stuff that's mutually related that you might not have thought about before. So for example, this is kind of a philosophy of mathematics cluster. And then if you click on that, you can be taken to all the different articles that are responsible for that cluster. Let me see if I have internet yet. No, I still don't. I don't know what's going on. Maybe I'll show it later. I have time to figure out why I keep locked out. You can also build some cool visualizations. So this is one where we took just the thinkers, the philosophers that appear in the encyclopedia, and built a semantic visualization on them based on their co-occurrence with one another all throughout different reference works. This one was actually in the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, I think. And then you can colorize the visualization based on the topic modeling. And so what you find, and this is kind of cool, is that some intuitive divisions that you might have used to group philosophers by, like, say, this is a kind of, the green group is what we would call continental philosophy, European, 19th, 20th century European philosophy. Then there's a kind of early modern group with Kant and Locke and Hobbes, Rousseau. There's a historical Greek cluster here. There's a kind of medieval, maybe Catholic philosophy cluster here. There's a more contemporary analytic, logic-based philosophy of language type cluster here. And these correspond, for whatever that's worth, to kind of divisions that you would see in the discipline or that someone might intuitively make when organizing philosophers. But you also see like which figures were most central in multiple traditions, right? So like Aristotle is a really big deal for lots of different people. Spinoza, Descartes, Leibniz, Kant, these turn out to be really central figures, which is maybe unsurprising given their current influence and role in lots of different traditions of philosophy.
It was literally off in left field.
Let me see if I can read it.
Sorry, it's not really important. It's just...
Yeah, so this is, no, but this is great information. This is Chinese philosophy. So, for example, if you thought important Chinese thinkers were currently underrepresented in the tradition in philosophy, you might show this picture to people and say, look, this was generated by the stats. Confucius, Junzi, Mencius, maybe you've heard of them. They had some good ideas too, right? But it does appear they're very represented in any of these prominent traditions in academic philosophy today. Maybe that's something to worry about. But that's the kind of thing you can see from one of these macroscope type views quite quickly, right? Which might be difficult to justify if you were talking to somebody who didn't already believe that there was this big underrepresentation problem. This is comparing two different reference works. So one thing we can do here is we lumped all the articles of the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And then all the blue links are from Stanford Encyclopedia and the red links are from Internet Encyclopedia. And they let you see how important different concepts are for the two different reference works. This might let you visualize bias in different reference works, for example. So, I won't go into details here, but you can see that for whatever reason, Turing and some computational stuff is really important in one, but not quite so much in the other. Okay, so I'll talk about general parameters. Those are just some quick tastes of what you can do once you have a bunch of tools off the ground and can ask lots of different questions of the same data sets with different analysis. What do I think should be some priorities for University of Houston? Just to get some conversations started, because I was the digital humanities postdoc and worked on the digital humanities initiative for a couple of years, we brought a bunch of people in and debriefed them from different universities about what you think might work at a place like UH. One thing that would be good for us to do is hire new DH faculty like Kristina, for example, who bring some DH experience with them when they come. That really helps everybody out. One big question to talk about is it better to bring in junior people or senior people? I think that's not obvious, and there's different challenges, and you need different strategies to do one or the other. Modernizing the promotion and tenure guidelines, I think, would be a big help. I think everybody sort of knows we need to do this. One of the problems, I don't want to point any fingers at UH because I personally found everybody to be great, but one of the worries is that tenure track faculty are maybe rightly risk averse, right? And so even if you come in under a chair and a dean that's very pro-DH, you need something on the books that's going to value your digital research, right? Something that, if somebody says, no, we're not going to count that. You can say, look at this guideline that's in the books here. It looks like you actually need to count this. That might encourage junior faculty to be less risk averse when it comes to digital research. Startup grants earmarked for digital humanities prototypes, I think is huge. We got a startup grant at Indiana to do this system. That allowed us to build a prototype that we could then use sorry, I'm going way over time. That we could use for applications to the NEH, and allowed us to make a convincing case that this system would work. And it wouldn't have been possible without a significant internal startup grant that allowed myself and my friend in computer science to work full-time on the grant for a year. Just wouldn't have been possible. Since then, we got more than $1.5 million other grant dollars that we brought into the university. It's not as much as in the STEM fields, but it's not negligible either, right? So I think, if we had some money earmarked just for DH, that could be something that could pay off. And then coursework, should we go grad or undergrad? I could also talk about best practices in DH from having worked on some bigger projects over time. I think you want to have a clear research question. You want to follow standards of open access as much as possible. You want to save the provenance information. This is huge. That's where your data came from. And make sure you've got that for everything you do an analysis on. It turns out to be really important even when you think it might not. You want to validate your analyses both qualitatively and quantitatively. I can talk more about that if anybody's curious. And you want to internationalize and standardize early on, especially thinking about multiple languages. Right? So for example, one of the analyses that we did later on was to compare work on French philosophy with work on English language philosophy. And we had to completely rewrite the code base because we didn't do the Unicode formulation for multiple languages right early on. And that turned out to be an enormous hassle, which we could have avoided if somebody had told me this right very early. And contribute to the linked open data cloud, which is this huge source of data that's just already out there on almost any topic, no matter what discipline you're in. There's enormous amounts of data that's already available to you. And you should take that data from places like DBpedia and also contribute to the cloud, which is consistent with open access principles. Okay, I'll stop there since I'm already over time, but I'm happy to talk more about any of these particular ideas in the general discussion.
Now we'll hear from Kristina.
Switch back to the. Sorry, I hate saying this. I am not a math person, so let's see. Okay, so first of all, thank you for organizing this panel today. This is actually a really exciting time to be involved in DH at UH because of all the interdisciplinarity that's going on, because of all the resources that are opening up, and all the conversations that have happened. This is now our second event within a month about DH, so it's a really great time to be here. I'm going to take a little bit different perspective from Cameron because I'm not trained in computers at all. So today what I want to do is really show you the three areas of my own work where DH has actually contributed. It'll be in research, in community projects, and in education. Now in research, this is really where my entrance into DH started because I encountered a problem that traditional methodologies couldn't solve. So I'm trained as a classical historian and as an archaeologist. And I was working on a problem of Roman annexation. So what happens to local communities when this big imperial force comes in and tries to take over? Now, in my ignorance as a graduate student, I chose one of the most difficult areas of the Roman world to work in, ancient Syria. And it's difficult because of the lack of textual sources. What material that we do have is primarily written from a Roman perspective, so we lose that local experience as to what happened when this imperial force came in. Now, archaeology has been very, very helpful in opening up whole sites, new artifacts, a great quantity of artifacts to look at, but I began my research in 2011, which if you think back, that's when the Syrian war broke out. So not only were my colleagues fleeing the country, there's been a systematic destruction of antiquities since then. So in addition to this horrific loss of life that we continue to see, this whole area of the empire really has been closed off to additional research. All right, so where did DH enter in? What I did have were 150,000 coins from 80 excavations spread throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. So I had a huge data set, but I didn't really have a way to enter it. So my first attempt was really taking a paper map and trying to map all of these coins on this 150,000 coins on a paper map, which did not work at all. Now, why are coins important? Well, many cities in the Middle East minted coins with their own identities, with their own histories, with their own bilingual inscriptions, even after the Romans came in. So my theory was, if I could look at all of these coins, figure out where they came from, and then where they ended up in the archaeological record, and in what quantities, I could start picking out circulation patterns. We know from other sources that these circulation patterns were determined based upon political situations, social factors, economic factors. So if I could figure out where these coins are, what patterns they show, this might in turn then start to speak to larger social, economic, and political practices as well. So this is where DH entered in. So I started small because I, again, did not have any computer background. And I started with the program, first of all, just creating data out of this set. I had all these coins, I had all these excavation reports, and I logged them into an Excel document and to try to figure out what categories would I best want to research. Now, picking up on a comment by Cameron, it's good to figure out early on what kind of questions you might want to ask from your data, because I had to do this twice when I realized that I later on discovered a question that my data couldn't actually answer as is. So that was all last summer, re-entering all of this data. But the first project I looked at was with Google Earth. So very simple interface, and I just logged all of those coins. And so the columns that you're seeing are quantities of coins from a single city. But Google Earth, soon as my questions started to develop, Google Earth didn't work. So I instead moved on to a program called Tableau. And what was great about Tableau is I could look at the circulation of coins from multiple cities at a single time. And again, in terms of data visualization software, this is also a very easy interface to use. Most recently, I've been working with Dr. Peggy Lindner from CACDS with a program called CACDS, which doesn't give you necessarily the spatial component like a Google Earth or Tableau, but it does help you look at relationships between areas. So here you can see where coins are moving and the different connections within the Roman Empire from just these Eastern coins as they're moving around. Again, the big thing here is finding a tool that best fits the questions as they arise. So it involves a lot of creativity, it involves a lot of failed attempts, but in the end, you can actually uncover a lot of information. So for my research, I was able to make sense out of all this noise of very disparate coins and actually begin to pull out patterns that I had missed and that a lot of my colleagues had also missed because we weren't looking at it in this visual digital context. Now this has led me to my second area of DH research, or DH work, which is the community component. So one of the basic principles of DH research is really with a community orientation. Whether this is within the academy and contacting and working with other colleagues, or by speaking to the wider public as well. So right now I'm working with the libraries, with Santi, with Adam, and with Bethany Scott, to develop an interactive website using the Omeka program. And the project is entitled Finding Connection in Ancient Syria. And the goal here is to help publicize the long legacy of multiculturalism in ancient Syria, and to do it in such a way that people actually want to engage in it. So we're working on it right now, so Peggy's also helping out here, to try to make sure that it's interactive. Somebody can explore the space in both the spatial context and chronological context. We were just talking today, getting some 3D scans of the coins in there so people can start interacting with that material as well. Again, my hope is that, first of all, it'll introduce people to this multiculturalism, and then also, again, with the systematic destruction of antiquities in Syria, that it'll also be a way of preserving that legacy as well. My third or last component of my DH work was really in education, and this is my most recent endeavor. When I arrived here 2 years ago, I challenged myself that every semester I was going to either learn a new tool or at least introduce a new digital project to my students. And this started out really simple. So currently my ancient Roman students are using Pinterest to curate an online exhibition of examples of Roman legacy in the modern world. So the goal is get them in their own context to notice where is ancient Roman history in their day-to-day lives. So this might involve a statue, a news item, a political article comparing, ancient figures to modern figures. It also could involve a TV reference, anything that they're seeing. So what they have to do is pin an image and then write a paragraph explaining why this constitutes Roman legacy. Then at the end of the semester, as they've gone around and they've looked for this information, I have another activity that asks them to go back and start interacting with their colleagues. Now, again, this super simple program, super simple idea, but it at least gets them, these digital natives, it starts to develop that digital literacy, or at least gets them to start thinking about the information that they're processing in the digital context. Now, it's also, on the flip side, I also want them to see best practices in work. And in operation. So with my undergraduates and graduate students, I want them to see field-specific projects that are digital in nature and exemplify the best practices that are available. Now last year, through funds through the Center for Public History, I was able to invite Dr. Rebecca Benefiel to campus, and she's responsible for the Ancient Graffiti Project. You might have seen the write-up in National Geographic and Smithsonian. It kind of blew up a few years ago. But what they're trying to do is catalog the 11,000 examples of ancient writing in Herculaneum and Pompeii and create an interactive, searchable database where you can start exploring where are these graffito, where are they coming up, where, in what context, what kind of dialogue happens. The ancient Romans had a practice of going into somebody else's house and writing on somebody else's wall, and you see whole conversations. And so their goal is to make this online interactive space, both for scholars and for students, to explore. Again, the purpose here for bringing her to campus is to show these students an example of, look at what you can do. Look at all the best practices, but then also to expand their conception of what digital humanities looks like. That it isn't simply building a website, it's so much more. So getting them to think about those principles of DH work. Finally, as part of this educational work, I've been mentoring self-selecting students in history who want to do a digital project. Last year, an undergraduate came to me and he was working on a history of Dowling Street, just nearby the campus. And he had all these oral interviews with people who had grown up on Dowling Street. He had historical images and he was looking for some way to bring this information together. Now, he told me right off the bat, he's like, I don't know computers. And I was like, that's okay, you don't have to. There are programs available. And so I find one of my jobs is to link students with those easy, accessible programs. So I introduced him to a program called History Pin. It's like a combination of Pinterest and Google Maps. And he created this very simple online exhibition which linked his data together. And the end product, it was simple, but it was effective. And he's very proud of the fact that it's been viewed 15 times, and it's not just his. But again, getting him to think about this information. I also have a graduate student who came to me a few months ago, and he's interested in developing a DH project that involves the Mexican-American border. So in his undergraduate days, he was looking at a figure who lived in El Paso and had Mexican connections, and then was also interacting with United States connections as well. And he wanted to see what the balance, what kind of categories are creating this transnational exchange. So he used Google Maps. It actually told him a lot, it added to his knowledge of what the relationship was. He found out that a lot of the Mexican connections were commercial, whereas a lot of the American connections were spending. And so he was getting his money and resources from Mexico and then spending it in socially appropriate ways, within especially in East Coast context in the US. Now he wants to take it to the next level. He wants to be able to create this online interactive space. So beginning to work with him on what kind of programs, what kind of information, and what questions does he need to ask as he's creating a data set. So overall, the real goal here is to educate, to inform, and then to let these students loose in their historical questions, whether it means a very simple program or a very complex program. So that's an introduction to kind of the spheres in which I'm operating with DH. I certainly look forward to your questions as we move forward. So thank you.
Santi Thompson from MDA Library.
While I'm setting up, many thanks to Taylor for organizing all of us. And it's really exciting to be part of this panel. We all have connections to one another, either through working on projects or helping the library find some new skilled employees. So I'm glad to be here with everyone. And I'm not sure what is going on here, but
Maybe use the USB on
there we go. So, okay, sure. Couple disclaimers. Digital humanities folks are kind, collaborative folks. So many of you know this, but librarians are also digital humanists. And the second disclaimer is I am not a digital humanist, but I'm a librarian. So in my capacity, I'm helping the library get organized around some of these issues, but I rely heavily on some of my colleagues who are here and other colleagues in the libraries to make the work of digital humanities happen in the library and collaboratively on campus. So I'm going, Taylor sort of prompted us to ask what are the kinds of DH projects that all of us in our own capacities can support. So I'm going to talk about a few that the libraries has supported over the last several years. And then talk about some new exciting news coming up as well. So one of the first areas that we have participated or contributed is through digital humanities consultations and pedagogy. And we've co-developed assignments with instructors that have been designed to give students experiences in the digital humanities. Taking a set of data, analyzing it in specific ways, so in the DH context, maybe through text analysis, and then helping them present that data in meaningful ways as well, usually through data visualizations. We've also worked with researchers and with instructors to find appropriate data sets, because as many of you know who have tried to do some of these projects, just getting data that you can understand and that answers the questions that you're trying to ask is not the easiest feat sometimes. So we've had some skilled expertise to help people comb through mostly open sources of data, but growing or increasingly also through subscription-based data sets. And in addition to working with faculty and with researchers on instruction purposes, we also have worked with individuals and small groups on an individualized basis around specific projects. So one of the projects that we're currently working on is with the Buckner Museum to create interactive visualizations from some of the data that they've collected on sort of demographics of visitors from different places who are coming to Buckner, so they have an understanding of what is their sort of reach and impact and who is visiting and sort of maybe why. As well as, and there are countless examples, so I tried to pick one that was sort of digital DH related. We've had a consultation with a faculty member in the African American Studies program who needed help analyzing historic circulation data for a particular newspaper called the Bilalian News. And so we're using a public version of Tableau to visualize and sort of mine that data in various ways. And I can probably later send links to all of this information if folks were interested in seeing it for themselves. We're also expanding the ways that we help DH publish and exhibit works for faculty, students, and staff. As Dr. Neumann talked about, we are piloting an Omeka pilot project with her and with Dr. Lindner on her work finding connections in Syria. And for those who aren't familiar, Omeka is a free, flexible, open source piece of software that publishes content on the web for scholarly collections and exhibitions. So often you'll see libraries using this to exhibit special collections materials, to extend the exhibit process beyond the physical space, but also to the virtual. So we don't have images yet of the fine work that Dr. Neumann is doing, so I included an image of a Omeka exhibit that the library created around homecoming at UH. Also part of the scholarly publishing process is accounting for the data that you use. So Dr. Buckner talked about the importance in terms of best practices of being transparent with the data that you've collected and sharing that data with others so they can either replicate or build on the work that you have done. And so we are launching, with the help of the Texas Digital Library, a research data repository called the Texas Data Repository that will hold all kinds of research data, but that includes humanities data. Again, to be more transparent with the work that we're doing as researchers and to help others find those data sets that may answer their research questions. We continue to expand our expertise around particular tools and methodologies, software and different methods, including GIS, text analysis, data discovery and manipulation, data management and preservation, and database design. So here are several, again, public tableau screenshots of visualizations of research data that has come from a project within the library. We had several librarians who were interested in using the current collections, our current holdings, to have an understanding of how local Houston musicians have been sort of represented in our collections, and how maybe they can begin to make connections from that bibliographic data around questions around who's influenced whom, or how prevalent or prominent certain musical genres or musicians have been in the local context. So here are a few, just again, visualization screenshots that they have been using. And finally, to keep it sort of brief, we have some exciting news to share on sort of where the libraries is headed around digital humanities and more broadly digital scholarship on campus. So we're in the process now of hiring 3 positions that will complement all the sort of work that many of my colleagues have been doing over the last several years. The first is not necessarily a new position, but maybe a tweak position around data services. So we're hiring a data services librarian that will provide support for geospatial, numeric, and other types of data, which I would assume would also include data in humanities. So if folks were familiar with Josh Ben, he was sort of in that previous kind of position. We're looking for someone maybe with not the extensive amount of experience he had, because those are rare to find, but someone who can complement the great work that he began and the connections that he built to keep this momentum moving forward. We're also hiring a digital scholarship coordinator who will help assist us with publishing, including the sort of exhibits that we hope to continue to produce over time, the research data that we continue to hope to make accessible and help researchers manage and contend with, and some other open access publishing methods that we as a campus are beginning to be more open to, but haven't really fully exploited in the ways that we probably can. And finally, with the help of Dr. Buckner, we are hiring a director of a digital research commons. That director will be in charge of taking a space with a set of technological tools and a series of experts around campus and creating a community that will help drive things like digital humanities moving forward. So that Digital Research Commons is opening in the fall of 2017. And we're hoping that it connects people and technology to promote research in the digital humanities and more broadly in digital scholarship. We're hoping that it leverages expertise from across the UH community and will offer opportunities for collaborative research and exploration around tools, some of which we're familiar with now and use regularly. And the one thing about DH is new tools arrive every day, so making sure that those tools and the new expertise that aligns with those tools exists on campus and can be sort of shared with others as broadly as possible. So this space will be open to all faculty and what we're calling advanced students, which are primarily graduate students, but we would never want to turn away an undergraduate student who has a legitimate research project, or in particular who's working maybe with a faculty member on a DH project. But this is a space made for you all, for the people in this room, for faculty and for graduate students primarily. to help build that community and cultivate sort of new research that moves beyond sort of the scope and the boundaries that we've set currently. So we're excited. We're in the very early stages of planning and rolling this out, so you'll hear many more details about this over the upcoming months. But DH is alive and well, I think, as Dr. Neumann said, and I think it's only going to get sort of more prominent and hopefully more sophisticated here at UH.
And our last presenter, Dr. Peggy Lindner.
Good morning, welcome. I did not prepare slides because I came to the panel last, and since we're also running out of time, I think this is perfect. But I'm here because I'm the liaison with the Center for Advanced Computing and Data System, and I think the interesting part is that Santi presented some of the resources here available on campus, and we like to complement those. So the idea is that groups on campus that develop those kind of digital humanities research projects and ideas will not be limited. And I don't want to say that the library is a limitation, but there will be always projects that you need more. And we are there to provide that more. In terms of resources, for instance, we have 3D scanners to scan artifacts. So we have a project going on with the Menil collection where we work with art historians on scanning projects. So that's one of the resources that's available in terms of tools and gadgets. But I'd also like to emphasize that in addition to tools and gadgets, we also need people. And that's the most important part here, that we should be able to train the people to generate the next generation of students and faculty who will be able to grow that. So so the other thing is that I'm at the Honors College as well, so I'm going to teach an introduction to the digital humanities course for undergrads in fall 2017. I'll make sure that emails will go out within the next 2 weeks, more information on it in terms of location, time, and enrollment information. We have already created the course for it. And the idea for me is to kind of build a baseline of introduction of digital humanities to the students. I will make it text-based because as you have seen on the project that we saw today, there is a huge variety of things that you can do within the digital humanities. I'd like to focus in a little bit to not overexpose students, because sometimes what's also happening that they see a lot of things and they get excited about a lot of things, but then you have to make sure that they get enough foundation to zoom in into something and do the intensive research that's needed. So the course will be text-based, but there will be a reading and writing component. So I'm interested in developing those skills, but there will be also a programming component, because usually the people we have here have one major. Some of them have minors, but they usually come from one major. It's not like that they study computer science and English at the same time. So we rarely have this. But I want to encourage people from both of those sides to take this course, so that the people, for instance, who have a computer science background but have an interest in the humanities can develop the other side of the skills. And the people who come from the humanities are not scared away by the technology and the computer science ideas and methodologies that have coming out of those areas. So that's my idea for the course, and that's where I'm already conclude now, because we want to be open for some questions and discussions.
So thank you guys so much. There's a lot of ideas happening. Please, if you have any questions, they are willing to answer them.
I have a question for the entire panel. In your presentation, Cameron, you made the distinction, or the question, do we go undergrads or do we go grads? And that's a question that myself I am asking in my experience. Where is this going on? Because I guess an undergrad will acquire some skills that make him more marketable, or marketable. For a graduate student will create a network, maybe a team, a collaborative team. So, in your opinion, Cameron, or in your opinion, you that you teach here, what do you think is the way we need to go first? I don't say that we have to eliminate one of them, but if we have to focus on one, what will be the best?
I guess I'll talk first. I don't know that we have to do one or the other. The point I was sort of more trying to make is that they have very different tensions and constraints. I think what Peggy's doing, especially in the honors college, might be the perfect place to host that kind of thing for undergrads. Is a great idea. If we were going for graduate students, though, I can talk about like the benefits and tensions there a little bit more. So I think the PhD students in many of the class humanities departments are very interested and maybe have a lot of anxiety when they go on the job market because they know that a lot of hiring departments are now adding plus DH to the end of their advertised positions. At the same time, they know that for promotion and tenure, often digital work can be controversial or not valued as highly as traditional humanities work. So when I'm advising PhD students, what should you do in this situation? I say you need to have an independent portfolio of traditional humanities stuff and then have some serious DH on top of that, which right now is extremely difficult, but that's the best plan. I think what we would need, and we actually had, with Rex Kuntz, we developed some grant proposals to try to get some money to get this thing going, was to have like a serious methods course that graduate students could take that would be designed to help them develop course projects from their, say, dissertation work or what's to become their dissertation work, where the emphasis would be more on sort of broad-based familiarization with methods, but also especially on project design. So they could get something going and then integrate it with what they're already doing on their dissertation. So we already have plans for that if anybody wants to talk about it. We didn't get the money, but I think it was a good idea and we came close a couple times.
And we also have to advise our students, graduate students, who are getting an offer to make sure that in their offer letter, in the contract letter,
absolutely.
that is stipulated, that they will be evaluated in digital humanities as well.
Absolutely.
Because it has to be written. If it's not in the bylaws or
right.
in the promotion and tenure guidelines, it has to be in the contract letter. We have had in Hispanic studies cases in the past of people who were creative writers, and that is in their contract, that for the promotion and tenure, a book in creative writing was going to be great. So, you have to be smart also to, we have to tell our students that is very important.
But these days for PhD hiring, I think it can just really make the difference because they've got a stack of hundreds of applications. We just advertised one philosophy position, we had 580 applications. You need something that makes you stand out, even if you're great. And I think that would really help our students get jobs.
And here internally at UH, a proposal from a DH group to the dean's office saying we would like to see this included in the PhD guidelines in the college. That would be the way to start because if we are doing all these workshops and initiatives, we need to recognize that formally for future PhD.
Yeah, I think there's like there is that two-tier. There's on the one hand, you need to make sure that on the administrative level that there's a recognition of these types of projects. And on the other side, I've been dropping into a bunch of graduate classes in the history department, just doing these digital history presentations. Look, this is what you can do, this is what it counts, and this is why you might be interested in it. And the response, some students really eager, but other ones are like, well, I have to do that on top of everything else. And so one of the things I consistently bring it back to, like Cameron pointed out, it can be part of your ongoing research. Like it can be whatever your dissertation topic, it doesn't need to be a completely separate project. In what way will a digital component actually enhance the work that you're already doing? Whether it's from a presentation standpoint or from an actual analytical standpoint. What can it do? How can it enhance the work that you're already doing? And I think for me, when it comes to graduate students, giving them opportunities to parachute down into already existing digital projects, I think is a very good option. I think a traditional methods course is very important, but then also giving them that, real world, on the ground kind of experience, and that will entail making sure that we have research money to, again, make it worth their while, so that as graduate students, they're being rewarded for their work, not just this is another line on your CV, but they're actually being paid and gaining those skills in a real world context as well.
And I'm with Cameron on that kind of like idea for graduate student that this needs to be project based. So that was also my reasoning with like, if I want to start teaching a course, I'm like, okay, let's do it for undergrads, because if they have something on their transcript, that's fine. If you just have, as a graduate student, if you just have a course on your transcript, I don't think that will make that difference. They have to come up with their own ideas and drive that research by the questions they have, instead of just basing it with some coursework. So that was my reasoning for just going into the undergrad part right now in terms of the teaching. I mean, if there are graduate students around that will want to audit it just to get some experience, I'm fine with that. We offer on-demand courses at the Center for Advanced Computing and Data Systems. If you have 3 students that need an intro into one of the methods, for instance, we certainly can do that. And we can accommodate like individual pathways and things like that along those routes.
Are you guys working at all with the QEP folks? I know it just came out, so
Yeah.
a week ago. Yeah? Okay.
Yes, I do.
Because with the community collaborative, I don't know all the ins and outs of that, QEP, what all they're focusing on, but it seems like it's a good fit,
Yeah, because the engagement part,
graduate QEP.
the engagement part that comes out of the QEP now, which goes basically beyond curriculum. And these are components that certainly make a really good fit with the digital humanities. That's also part of the course that I envision, that I try to teach the students to go out and ask questions. Instead of sitting there waiting for a teacher to ask questions that they then have to fill out, try to get them to understand it in a bigger picture. So, and that's part of like things that can come out of those ideas.
Maybe one more question?
I have a question. It's for Santi. You mentioned serious proposals or more organized work by graduate students being open for consideration for support and services. Who would a graduate student get in contact with about that? I mean, does it need to be something that is attached to a faculty member?
Not particularly. So again, we'll have a space where a lot of this kind of work can occur. And in theory, they could literally walk into that space and work with the director, who will be sort of habitating that space on a regular basis.
I mean more like immediately, like.
Oh,
between now
currently.
and- Because I know, I work with students a lot, and I know that there's a growing need and a little bit of a confusion as to who do I get in contact with? Do I go to CACDS first? Do I have an advisor attached to this?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that so right now, because we're hiring these positions, unless we have the current skill set on staff at the library to help someone, it's difficult to necessarily place a graduate student in a position to be successful if we just don't have the skill sets. Now, with the new hires, we're hoping that a lot of those gaps that currently exist will probably not completely close, but will get narrower. But I suspect moving forward, one of the things that would be helpful for the entire UH community is for groups like this to come together and have more concrete conversations around what are the offerings and how can we work together to fill the gaps across what librarians call, but we're the only people, I think, who call it the research life cycle, right? I've talked to faculty about the research life cycle, and I see blank sort of stares of dread come over their faces. But there's a process here, right? And there are certain areas where CACDS is really well suited to help folks, right? So how can we as the library know where those areas are and be able to direct people to those expertise, right? So, for example, if CACDS is doing 3D scanning, we should be able to communicate that to all kinds of people because CACDS is open to all audiences on campus. So if we as librarians know that this is a need in your sort of research area, we should be able to direct folks in that way. Likewise, Arte Publico is about to get a Clear Fellow, correct? Who will have, we're hoping, extensive experience in some of these areas, right? So how can we know where they're situated to help the campus sort of know what suite of services are available to you and how can we best align you to be successful in answering those questions. So that's where we're headed. Currently now, my suggestion would be to contact me, to contact liaison librarians, so we can sort of figure out what does exist and how can we put you in contact with either librarians who can help you or some of those campus experts who are well suited to do the same kinds of things or to do different things that the library just isn't positioned to do. So one of the things that we're hoping the digital scholarship coordinator, who's one of the new hires coming in, will do is help us have a broader understanding of this landscape and help us know where the library is well suited and where are the experts externally that can help make all these connections line up. So I didn't really answer your question too.
No, but it's a vision of the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly on our radar. We know that to be sustainable, we can't just have one person doing all kinds of things, and we can't also just rely on just what the library is capable of doing. It's going to take the whole community to make DH a reality, or at least to do it, I think, well.
And we discussed digital scholarship, but if I want to bring a project like you did, Kristina, to my undergrad, start in the base, to whom I contact. I am not going into a project, my research, no, I just want for the students to have a product in the class. It's an undergrad. So where do I go?
But if it's in your class, it should become you. I mean, it's not like that the projects are kind of like in a cloud that people can pick. It's not like these things, they might be there, but it needs to be a communication between the students and a faculty member to kind of develop. Sometimes it's the student who says, hey, I want to do that, and as a faculty mentor, you can kind of like, I know that somebody else did something similar, why don't you do a little bit of research and find out first where you want to go. And if a student comes to me and just says, I want to do something, I'm usually a little bit like, what do you want to do? Because it's not like that I'm sitting here waiting for students to come and ask me for a project. This needs to be developed and driven by the individual, and that is the student in combination with a faculty member in the domain. It's not like that digital humanities as a cloud sits there and provides projects. Of course there are projects, but they're driven by individuals, not by the cloud that we're going to call digital humanities.
I was talking about the assignments that the teachers.
But this comes from her.
Yeah,
So it will be, I will be responsible for finding the.
So, in the past, and sorry about that, when we previously had what is now a data services librarian, I can't remember what Josh's official title was. Data services, GIS librarian, something to that effect, right? He did far more things than GIS though, so that was a little misleading to just say GIS. I do know that in the past, he had worked, and we still have librarians who work with faculty members to think about not necessarily giving a project, but asking a research question for the class to sort of think about as a whole and work through tools to help answer those research questions. I don't have any off the top of my head that are around the digital humanities context, but I do know that, for example, he worked with people in the health sciences on a class that looked at like food deserts and some other variable and mapping where there were food deserts or where there were locations in Harris County that were sort of devoid of supermarkets or fresh food, and how that impacted certain variables in sort of health and well-being. And he was able to work with the faculty member to identify a set of data, usually using open data sets, but not always, to use that data to then help students understand how you work with data, how you use data to sort of manipulate and process and visualize the results, to answer those kinds of questions around how do food deserts impact X, Y, and Z variables in ways that you maybe couldn't answer just by looking at the data alone or by looking at secondary sources. So that kind of relationship, once we have a data services librarian at the libraries, would, I think, in theory, be possible. You would want to work with your liaison librarian and with that individual to begin to think about what are the possibilities for integrating these kinds of tools and questions into the classroom. So like Peggy mentioned, they're just not out there, like there's just not like an Omeka site you can go to and finally have like a project you can share with people, right?
Well, but I would say though, if you want to do it a little bit more organically, like if you want to start within your classroom, like the two resources I always go to, there's the DIRT directory,
That's right.
which is, an online database of different tools that are used. And so I think the website is dirtdirectory.org. And I find that to be a useful way because there are also rating systems about how easy it is to use. And so I find that helpful. And then the other source that I go to is the Digital Humanities Quarterly, which is online, open access. And I just browse through the index and I see what kind of projects people are using and what kind of tools are they using. And so those are my two resources for thinking about new tools I want to use and new tools I want to integrate. Some of them are more complex, so it's helpful to have those outside experts. But other ones, you never know. There's one where it's a tagging site where you upload an image and you can just tag different parts of the image. So my students did it with historical maps from the Roman provinces. And again, just stumbled upon it and started uploading it. But I mean, so some of it is more organic, but in terms of good resources, I think the DIRT directory and the Digital Humanities Quarterly are very useful sites as well.
And I would also say, from the educational technology sector, talk to some instructional designers because we see a lot of courses and a lot of the different assignments that people are already doing. So, we kind of have a window into the different silos that are happening across campus. So, we got to wrap it up because we're out of time, but please join me in thanking our panelists again. As a small token of our appreciation, we have an analog. Thank you guys so much.
So useful. Yeah, thank you so much.